Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. The Infinite Accord was, by any reasonable measure, the most pretentious ship ever constructed. 3 miles of gleaming alloy, enough diplomatic suites to house a small nation, and a name that practically screamed, "We're better than you," in 6,000 languages. It hung in the neutral zone between human space and the Drethal Empire like a monument to optimism, or stupidity, depending on who you asked. Today, it was hosting what the Galactic Assembly called crucial peace negotiations. The humans called it "Please Don't Exterminate Us" talks. The Drethal called it "Accepting the Inevitable with Grace." Ainsley stood in the security queue, watching alien delegates shuffle through scanners that hummed with technology humanity had only dreamed about a decade ago. She tugged at her diplomatic uniform, too stiff, too formal, too everything. This was her first interstellar assignment, and she'd already spilled coffee on the itinerary during the shuttle ride over. Great start, she thought, really selling the competent species angle. The Drethal were insectoid nightmares pulled straight from humanity's collective phobia catalog. 8 feet tall, chitinous armor that could stop small arms fire, mandibles that could crush steel, and forearms that ended in claws designed by evolution's cruelest engineer. They'd conquered 238 star systems through a combination of superior technology and the simple fact that most species took one look at them and surrendered immediately. Ainsley had read the briefing files. The Drethal Empire didn't negotiate. They dictated terms. This whole summit was political theater, a formality before Earth either bent the knee or got steamrolled. Fun times ahead. She stepped up to the scanner, and a Drethal security officer, if you could call something that looked like a tank with legs an officer, gestured with one claw toward the examination field. The scanner came alive, bathing her in blue light that felt like being watched by 1,000 judgmental eyes. Somewhere in the machine's electronic brain, algorithms analyzed her down to the molecular level. Height, weight, bone density, muscle composition, threat assessment protocols running through scenarios at computational speeds that would make Earth's best supercomputers weep with envy. The display flickered to life above her head, visible to every security officer in the checkpoint. Species, human classification, unarmed female threat, level, negligible. The Drethal officer made a clicking sound that the translator rendered as dismissive laughter. He waved her through without a second glance, already focused on the next delegate in line. To him, she was furniture. Harmless decoration. Not even worth the processing power to remember her face. Ainsley walked into the grand negotiation chamber, trying very hard not to care about being classified as negligible. It wasn't personal. The Drethal looked at most species that way. Anything that couldn't bench press a hover tank or survive in hard vacuum was basically a particularly clever pet. The chamber itself was designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings that soared into artificial twilight, enough space to park a battleship, and a massive circular table that seated delegates from 18 different species. At the head of the table, because of course he'd claimed the head position, sat Bremoth the Conqueror. Even sitting down, he was terrifying. Larger than the other Drethal, with battle scars etched into his carapace like a resume written in violence. His 4 eyes, compound and cold, surveyed the room with the casual confidence of someone who'd personally ended civilizations before breakfast. The human delegation sat in their assigned seats, looking like students called to the principal's office. Their lead diplomat, Ambassador Petrov, was a man who'd negotiated treaties on 4 continents back on Earth. He'd walked into war zones armed with nothing but a briefcase and his convictions. He'd brokered peace between factions that had been killing each other for generations. None of that mattered here. Ainsley took her seat at the junior end of the table, close enough to observe, far enough away to be forgotten. She pulled out her tablet, ready to take notes nobody would read, and tried to look competent. Braymoth spoke, and the chamber's translation system rendered his chittering clicks into cold, precise English. We gather here to discuss terms of integration. The Drethal Empire recognizes humanity's industrial capacity and wishes to incorporate Earth into our sphere of prosperity. Incorporate. What a lovely word for conquer. Ambassador Petrov stood, his voice steady despite the fact that he was addressing something that could literally tear him in half. The people of Earth appreciate the Empire's interest, but we come here to negotiate a partnership, not a submission. Humanity values its independence and independence. Braymoth let the word hang in the air like a bad smell. An interesting concept. Tell me, Ambassador, how independent were the Phelan before they joined the Empire? Or the Greth? Or any of the 238 systems that now thrive under our protection? One of the Drethal officers leaned toward another, mandibles clicking. The translator caught fragments. Delusional. Always the same. They learn eventually. Ainsley's hand tightened around her stylus. She kept her face neutral, kept taking notes, kept playing the role of the invisible junior diplomat who was absolutely not mentally cataloging the structural weaknesses of the chamber and the positioning of every guard. Old habits. The negotiations continued in that vein for an hour. Petrov trying diplomacy. Braymoth responding with barely veiled threats, wrapped in diplomatic language. It was like watching someone try to reason with an avalanche. Technically possible, but the avalanche wasn't really interested in your perspective. Then the doors exploded inward. Not figuratively. Actually exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal that sent delegates diving for cover. Armed Drethal poured through the breach, but these weren't security forces. Their armor was painted with symbols that even Ainsley's limited xenobiology knowledge recognized as radical military faction markers. Extremists. The Drethal, who thought peace talks were a sign of weakness. Oh, this was bad. Plasma fire lit up the chamber like a deadly light show. Delegates screamed in 6 different languages. The security forces tried to respond, but they'd been positioned to keep delegates in, not extremists out. Basic security failure, Ainsley thought distantly, even as she rolled behind an overturned chair. The extremist leader, marked by more ornate armor and an absolute aura of "I have strong opinions and a gun," fired a single shot into the ceiling. The plasma bolt hit something structural and rained sparks down on everyone. The Infinite Accord is now under new management. The translator rendered his clicks into something cold and final. Braymoth the Compromiser has forgotten what made the Empire strong. We will remind him. One of the extremists grabbed Ambassador Petrov. The ambassador struggled, still trying to talk, still believing words could fix this. The extremist regarded him for a moment, with all the emotion of someone swatting a fly. Then, fired, point blank. Petrov dropped, and time seemed to slow down in that horrible way it does when your brain is processing something it doesn't want to accept. Other delegates started screaming. More plasma fire cut through the air as the extremists executed anyone who looked like they might be important. Ainsley hit the ground as a bolt passed over her head close enough to smell ozone. She assessed the situation in the space between heartbeats. 23 hostiles, armed with military-grade plasma rifles. Exits sealed. Remaining delegates, maybe 30, clustered in panicked groups. Security forces dead or disabled. Nobody was coming to save them. Even if the ship's loyalist crew retook the bridge, these extremists would execute hostages before allowing a rescue. Standard extremist playbook. Make the price of intervention too high to pay. She lay still among the debris and bodies, bleeding from a gash on her temple where flying shrapnel had caught her. She controlled her breathing, let her eyes go unfocused, played dead. Because Ainsley had learned a long time ago, in places that didn't exist on any official map, that sometimes the best weapon was being underestimated. The scanner had called her negligible. Time to prove it wrong. Ainsley counted heartbeats. A useful skill when you needed your brain to focus on something other than the fact that you were surrounded by heavily armed extremists who'd just murdered half the diplomatic corps. 63 beats. The extremists were fanning out, securing positions, checking bodies. Professional, disciplined. Exactly what you'd expect from military radicals who'd planned this operation down to the microsecond. 91 beats. One of them stepped over her, close enough that she could see the scoring on his chitinous leg armor where plasma fire had grazed him in some previous battle. He didn't even glance down. Just another dead human. Negligible. 120 beats. They were herding the surviving delegates toward the center of the chamber, away from the exits, away from anything useful. Bremoth was among them, his forearms bound with energy restraints, his mandibles clicking in what might have been rage or calculation. Hard to tell with giant alien warlords. Ainsley cracked one eye open, just enough to assess angles and distances through the curtain of her own hair. The extremist nearest to her position had his back turned, focused on the hostage cluster. His plasma rifle hung from a tactical sling, bouncing against his side as he moved. Amateur hour, she thought. You never leave a weapon on a sling where someone can grab it. But then again, why would he worry? She was classified as negligible. She moved like liquid shadow, rising from her position of manufactured death with zero wasted motion. 3 steps brought her within range. Her right hand locked onto the rifle's grip, while her left struck the soft joint where the Drethal's neck met his thorax, a spot she'd memorized from the biological briefings that everyone assumed she'd just skimmed. The extremist made a gurgling click of surprise as his neural cluster got rattled. Not enough to kill, but enough to send his motor functions on a brief vacation. Ainsley yanked the rifle free, spun, and brought the stock up into his mandibles with a crack that echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. He went down hard. The security scanner, still active on its pedestal near the entrance, suddenly flickered. New data input. New threat assessment protocols engaging. Reclassification in progress. 2 more extremists turned at the sound of their comrade hitting the floor. Ainsley was already moving, using the first extremist's body as cover, while she familiarized herself with the plasma rifle's controls. Drethal weapons were designed for 4 hands, but humans had gotten pretty good at adapting alien tech through sheer stubborn necessity. The first shot went wide. She'd misjudged the recoil. The second shot took the nearest extremist in the center mass, punching through his armor in a spray of superheated chitin and regret. The third shot was perfect. Now she had their attention. Plasma fire lit up her position like a deadly light show. Ainsley rolled behind an overturned diplomatic podium. Real wood, imported from some garden world at ruinous expense, now serving as a bullet stop. The irony wasn't lost on her. "Contact! Section 3!" one of the extremists chittered. And oh, good, they were using tactical language. That meant training, discipline, probably military. experience. This was going to be fun. The dangerous kind of fun. The kind that got you killed if you stopped moving for even a second. Ainsley's mind shifted into that cold, analytical space she'd sworn she'd left behind. The place where people became targets, cover became assets, and morality took a back seat to survival. She'd promised herself, after the incident, the one they'd classified so hard it had its own classification, that she'd never go back there. Promises were negotiable when people were dying. She popped up, fired 3 rounds at different targets, dropped back down before return fire could find her. 1 hit, 2 misses, but now they didn't know where she'd appear next. Keep them guessing. Keep them reactive instead of proactive. A flashback hit her between one heartbeat and the next. Rainforest, 3 years ago. 40 hostiles and a mission that officially never happened. She'd been part of a unit that specialized in impossible odds and deniable operations. They'd called her Ghost because she had a talent for appearing where enemies least expected and disappearing before they could respond. She'd been good at it. Too good. Good enough that when the mission went sideways and she'd had to make choices that kept her awake at night, Command decided she was too much of a liability to keep in the field. Hence, the diplomatic posting. A nice, quiet job where the most dangerous thing would be bad catering and boring speeches. So much for that plan. Ainsley vaulted over her cover, firing as she moved. The key to fighting Drethal wasn't matching their strength. That was a losing game. It was exploiting their assumptions. They fought like tanks because they were tanks. Heavily armored, overwhelming firepower, designed to win through superior force. Humans fought like wasps. Fast, annoying, and you never saw the sting coming. She hit the ground in a slide, came up under a conference table, and fired up through the surface. The plasma bolt punched through expensive alien hardwood and caught an extremist in the leg joint. He stumbled, and Ainsley was already moving again, staying low, staying mobile. The scanner was really working overtime now. Its display flickered through threat assessment calculations like a slot machine having an existential crisis. Threat assessment, recalculating. Combat effectiveness, anomalous danger rating, elevated. One of the extremists made a strategic mistake. He tried to chase her, left his covering position, committed to pursuit, probably thinking he could corner the little human and end this embarrassment. Ainsley led him on a merry chase around an ornamental pillar, then reversed direction faster than his tactical computer could track. She came at him from his blind spot. Drethal had excellent peripheral vision, but even they had angles where their compound eyes didn't quite overlap. She didn't have a knife, didn't need one. The shattered remains of a decorative sculpture provided a nice sharp edge. That did the job just fine when applied to the soft joint behind his knee. He went down, and she took his sidearm before moving on. Now she had 2 guns. This was going well, in the barely surviving by the skin of her teeth kind of way. Bremoth, still bound and surrounded by hostage-takers, watched this display with an expression that the translator couldn't quite render. His 4 eyes tracked her movements with something that might have been professional respect, or possibly disbelief that a negligible threat was currently carving through his enemies like a natural disaster with a grudge. The extremist leader finally got involved, barking orders that sent his remaining forces into coordinated positions. They were adapting, learning, treating her like an actual threat instead of an irritating pest. Progress, in a way. Ainsley found herself pinned behind the ruins of what had been a very expensive refreshment station. Plasma bolts turned exotic alien beverages into superheated vapor. The smell was actually kind of nice, like burnt vanilla and ozone. She assessed her situation. Low on cover, surrounded on 3 sides, maybe 8 rounds left in the rifle and 4 in the sidearm. The hostages were still clustered in the center, and if she died here, they'd die too. The extremists would execute them the moment they secured the chamber. Unacceptable. So she did what humans do best when faced with impossible odds. She improvised. The refreshment station had been serving something called Harmonious Blend, a drink that was apparently 3 parts juice and 2 parts industrial solvent based on the warning labels. Ainsley grabbed 2 containers, shook them vigorously, and threw them into the nearest cluster of extremists. The containers ruptured on impact, spraying their contents across armor and weapons. For a moment, nothing happened, and the extremists looked confused by this bizarre human behavior. Then the plasma fire from their own weapons ignited the solvent. The explosion wasn't huge. This wasn't an action movie. But it was enough to send 3 extremists stumbling backward, disoriented, their tactical formations broken. Ainsley was already moving, using the chaos to relocate. She came up behind their position and fired precisely, professionally, putting rounds exactly where they'd do the most damage to armor joints and weapon systems. The scanner's display went absolutely haywire. Reclassification. Battlefield Variable Threat Level. Catastrophic when motivated. Recommended response. Overwhelming force species. Analysis requires revision. The extremist leader saw the display and made a clicking sound that needed no translation. It was the universal language of, "Oh, we messed up." Because here's the thing about humans that the galaxy kept learning the hard way. They didn't need to be the strongest or the fastest. They just needed to be stubborn enough to keep fighting when any sane species would surrender, and creative enough to turn literally anything into a weapon. Diplomats included. Ainsley fired her last 3 rounds, dropped the empty rifle, and drew the sidearm in one smooth motion. She was breathing hard now, bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, running on adrenaline, and the kind of focused determination that came from accepting you might die, but deciding to make it expensive for the other side. She met Bremoth's eyes across the chamber. The warlord tilted his head in something that might have been a nod. And in that moment, trapped in a chamber full of extremists with a timeline measured in heartbeats, Ainsley had an absolutely terrible idea, which meant it was probably the right one. The terrible idea involved trusting a warlord who'd been about to subjugate her entire planet approximately 90 minutes ago. But desperate times and all that. Ainsley caught Bremoth's attention again and made a series of hand signals. She had no idea if Drethal military used anything similar, but certain concepts, like "cover me" and 12 o'clock, and "we're all going to die if we don't work together," tended to translate across species barriers. Bremoth's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement or possibly a threat display. Hard to read alien body language when you're being shot at. Then he moved. Even bound with energy restraints, the warlord was terrifying in motion. He threw himself sideways, crashing into 2 of his captors with enough force to send them sprawling. It wasn't an escape attempt. It was a distraction. A big, violent, everyone look at me kind of distraction. Ainsley used those 3 seconds of chaos to sprint toward the hostage cluster, firing as she went. Her aim was surgical. She wasn't trying to kill everyone, just create enough confusion to break the extremists' formation. Keep them reactive. Keep them guessing. She slid into the hostage group like a runner stealing home, grabbed a piece of shattered furniture, and jammed it into the energy restraint mechanism on Bremoth's bindings. The device sparked, sputtered, and died with a sound like electronic disappointment. The warlord's forearms flexed, newly freed, and he turned to look at her with those cold, compound eyes. "You have a plan, human?" "Working on it," Ainsley gasped, checking her remaining ammunition. 4 shots left, against 15 hostiles. Math was not her friend right now. That is not encouraging. Yeah, well, welcome to humanity. We specialize in making it up as we go. Plasma fire forced them both behind an overturned bench. Bramoth studied her for a moment, and Ainsley could practically see the tactical computer behind those alien eyes running calculations. "The bridge," he said finally. "These extremists control the ship. Even if we survive here, they will vent this section to space or flood it with gas. We must retake command." "Great. How?" "There is a maintenance conduit, accessible through the ceremonial chamber beyond that wall." He gestured with one claw. "It was designed for emergency evacuation of important delegates." "So why haven't the other delegates used it?" "Because," Bramoth's mandibles clicked in what might have been dark humor, "the conduit requires traversing a space filled with the ship's primary power couplings. Any contact with the couplings results in instant electrocution. It was assumed that, in an emergency, delegates would prefer certain death in the chamber over possible death in the conduit." Ainsley stared at him. "That's the worst emergency evacuation plan I've ever heard." "The Drethel do not design for cowardice." "You mean you don't design for basic survival instincts?" More plasma fire lit up their position. One of the extremists was getting brave, advancing with covering fire from his companions. Ainsley fired twice, forcing him back, then swore as the sidearm clicked empty. Out of ammunition. "Excellent." She looked at Bramoth, at the wall he'd indicated, at the extremists closing in. Did some quick mental math about their odds of survival if they stayed here versus their odds of surviving a maintenance conduit full of deadly power couplings. "The conduit," she said. "Let's go." "You understand we will likely die?" "Buddy, I understood that the moment I woke up this morning and put on this diplomatic uniform. At least this way we die doing something." Bramoth made that clicking sound again. If she didn't know better, she'd think he was laughing. They moved as one, Bramoth using his bulk to shield the remaining hostages, while Ainsley provided covering fire with the now empty pistol. Sometimes the threat of gunfire was as good as actual gunfire. It kept heads down, bought precious seconds. The wall panel came away easier than expected. Beyond it lay a narrow corridor that glowed with the eerie blue light of active power systems. Conduits ran along the walls like technological veins, humming with enough energy to power a small city, or kill anything that touched them very, very thoroughly. "After you," Ainsley said. "Human humor in the face of death." How quaint. "We cope how we cope." Bramoth squeezed into the conduit, his bulk barely fitting in the space. Ainsley followed, pulling the panel shut behind them just as plasma fire turned their former position into molten slag. The conduit was exactly as advertised, a claustrophobic nightmare filled with things that wanted to kill them. The power couplings buzzed and crackled, throwing off heat that made the air shimmer. There was maybe 6 inches of clearance on either side. "This is insane," Ainsley muttered, pressing herself flat against the wall to avoid a particularly aggressive-looking coupling. "You are the one who agreed to the plan." "I'm reassessing my life choices." "Welcome to Command Decisions." They moved slowly, carefully, every step a negotiation with physics and probability. Bramoth had the advantage of chitinous armor, but even that wouldn't save him from a direct hit with enough voltage to run a star freighter. Ainsley had the advantage of being smaller, more flexible, and completely terrified, which kept her very, very focused. "Tell me something, human," Bramoth said as they navigated around a junction where 3 conduits met in a tangle of certain death. Your file said you were a junior diplomat. First assignment. That's correct. I have been in combat for 30 cycles. I know a soldier when I see one. Ainsley was quiet for a moment, focused on not dying. Then, I used to be. Special operations. The kind that doesn't officially exist. Why did you leave? Because I was too good at it. Bramoth processed that. Explain. There was a mission. Things went wrong. I had to make choices. She ducked under a low-hanging coupling, felt the heat of it against her back. When it was over, Command decided I was too much of a variable, too willing to break rules to get results. So they offered me early retirement and a nice, quiet diplomatic post. And you accepted. I was tired of fighting. Thought maybe I could do more good with words than weapons. She laughed, short and bitter. How's that working out? You saved my life. You are currently crawling through a death trap to save others. I would say it is working adequately. They emerged into a wider section, a junction chamber where maintenance crews would normally work. It was blessedly free of deadly power couplings, just normal lighting and breathable air. Ainsley sagged against a wall, breathing hard. How much further? Another 100 meters. Then we access the bridge through the command deck's maintenance entry. And once we're there, then we face however many extremists control the bridge, armed with whatever we can improvise from maintenance equipment. So basically suicide? Yes. Cool. Just checking. Bramoth regarded her with those alien eyes, and something shifted in his expression. Your people. How did you survive long enough to reach the stars? What do you mean? The Drethal conquered through strength. We built better weapons, stronger ships, more efficient military doctrine. We measured species by their combat capability, their technology, their resources. He gestured at her with one claw. Humans have none of these advantages. By every logical assessment, your species should have been conquered or destroyed long ago. Yet here you are. Ainsley understood what he was really asking. She'd seen it in his eyes back in the chamber, when the scanner reclassified her. That moment of realization that something about humanity didn't add up. We don't fight fair, she said simply. Every other species measures war in terms of strength, technology, honor. They have rules, doctrines, proper ways to conduct battle. She met his eyes. Humans don't care about proper. We care about winning. We'll use guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare, asymmetric strategies that make no sense to conventional military thinking. We'll turn anything into a weapon. We'll fight from positions of weakness and somehow make it a strength. That is chaos, not strategy. It's both. It's organized chaos. It's the refusal to accept that just because someone's stronger or more advanced, they automatically win. She pushed off the wall, ready to continue. The galaxy keeps trying to measure humanity by the wrong metrics. You look at our physical capabilities, our technology, our resources. But you're missing the most dangerous thing about us. Which is, we're stubborn, we're creative, and we absolutely refuse to quit when any sane species would surrender. She smiled, sharp and dangerous. You want to know why humanity survived? Because we're too stupid to know when we're beaten, and too clever to let that stop us. Bramoth was silent for a long moment. Then he accessed a panel on his armor, some kind of data interface, and pulled up information that made his mandibles click in what might have been surprise or possibly horror. I am reviewing your species' conflict history, he said slowly. The Drethal military assessment focused on your current capabilities. But this... He scrolled through a data, compound eyes processing at speeds human vision couldn't match. Your people have spent most of your existence fighting each other. The strategies you developed, the tactics, the psychological operations. Yeah, we're really good at war. We've had a lot of practice. The Drethal assumed you were weak because you lacked overwhelming force, but you developed asymmetric warfare as a survival strategy. Insurgencies, resistance movements, turning civilian infrastructure into military assets. He looked at her with something that might have been respect or possibly fear. You are not weak. You are terrifying. Only when motivated. What motivates you? Ainsley thought about Ambassador Petrov, about the other delegates who died, about Earth and all the messy, complicated, stubborn humans who called it home. Protecting what's ours. That's it. That's the thing that'll make us fight against impossible odds. We don't care if you're stronger, if you're more advanced, if by every logical measure we should lose. You threaten what we love, and we become the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. The scanner, somewhere back in the chamber, would have been recalculating threat assessments if it could see this conversation, running new projections based on data it had never considered relevant. Bremoth stood, all four arms flexing. The Empire needs to revise its assessment of humanity. That'd be nice. Not nice. Necessary. Because the alternative, humanity as an enemy, is a war we cannot win. We don't want war. I know. Which is why I am going to ensure this alliance happens as equals, not as conquerors and conquered. He started moving again, toward the bridge access point. But first, we must survive the next 10 minutes. Story of my life, Ainsley muttered, following him into whatever fresh nightmare waited ahead. Because that was the human way. Keep moving forward, even when the odds were impossible. Especially when the odds were impossible. The bridge access hatch was designed for maintenance drones, not diplomats and warlords attempting a hostile takeover of their own ship. Ainsley squeezed through first, emerging into a cramped equipment bay that smelled like ozone and recycled air. Through the ventilation grating above, she could hear the extremists on the bridge. 8 of them, maybe 9, based on the distinct clicking patterns of Drethal's speech. They were arguing about something, probably whether to execute the hostages now or use them as leverage later. Fantastic options all around. She signaled to Bremoth, who emerged from the hatch with significantly more difficulty. Watching an 8-foot warlord try to fold himself through a 2-foot opening was almost comical. Almost. Hard to find humor when you were about to commit suicide by bridge assault. "Weapons?" she whispered. Bremoth looked around the equipment bay, considering their options. There was a plasma torch meant for cutting through hull breaches, a gravitic wrench that could crush metal, some kind of coolant system that was probably toxic to most life forms. This is a maintenance bay, not an armory. So we improvise. Very human of us. I am beginning to understand why your species gives the galaxy headaches. Ainsley grabbed the plasma torch and tested its weight. Not ideal, but it would cut through armor if she got close enough. The gravitic wrench went to Bremoth, who hefted it like a club. Between them, they had approximately 1 terrible plan and 0 backup options. Perfect. "On 3?" she asked. "On 3. 1. 2. They hit the bridge like a natural disaster with a grudge. The access panel exploded outward, Bremoth's contribution, and Ainsley rolled through the opening with the plasma torch ignited and swinging. The element of surprise bought them maybe 3 seconds, which in combat was either an eternity or nowhere near enough time depending on your perspective. She went low, taking out the leg joints of the nearest extremist with a sweep of superheated plasma. He went down screaming in that chittering way that the translator couldn't quite handle. Bremoth went high, using the gravitic wrench to cave in another extremist's thorax with a wet crunch that needed no translation. Then, chaos. Plasma fire filled the bridge. Ainsley used a command console for cover, the torch in one hand and a piece of broken equipment in the other. Not exactly military-grade hardware, but humans had been making do with improvised weapons since someone first picked up a rock and realized it made other things stop moving. The bridge was smaller than the negotiation chamber, which meant less room to maneuver, but also less distance for the extremists to maintain tactical superiority. Close quarters favored the crazy ones, willing to get personal. Ainsley was very willing. She vaulted over her cover, landed behind an extremist, focused on Bremoth, and introduced him to the business end of the plasma torch. His armor held for maybe a second before the torch punched through and found something vital. He dropped, and she took his sidearm before his body hit the deck. Now this was more like it. Bremoth was in his element, all four arms moving in coordinated violence that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so terrifying. The gravitic wrench sang through the air, crushing weapons, armor, and extremist confidence with equal efficiency. He fought like a force of nature, unstoppable and utterly without mercy. The extremist commander, the one from the chamber who'd made all this possible, finally engaged directly. He was larger than the others, more experienced, and he moved with the confidence of someone who'd won a lot of fights. He hadn't fought Ainsley. She came at him from an angle he wasn't expecting, using the bridge's holographic display system as cover. The plasma torch carved through a support strut, and half a ton of equipment came crashing down between them. While he was distracted, she fired 3 shots from the stolen sidearm, one high, one low, one center mass. The high shot missed. The low shot cracked his knee joint. The center mass shot punched through a weak point in his armor where 2 plates met. He staggered, and that was all Bremoth needed. The warlord crossed the bridge in 2 massive strides and brought the gravitic wrench down with enough force to crack the deck plating. The commander stopped being a problem. Silence fell across the bridge, broken only by the sound of damaged systems trying to reboot, and Ainsley's ragged breathing. She counted bodies. 8 extremists down. The bridge was secure. They'd actually done it. They'd retaken the ship with maintenance equipment and sheer bloody-minded determination. Very human indeed. Bremoth moved to the command console, his 4 arms dancing across controls designed for his species. Status displays flickered to life, showing the ship's condition. The negotiation chamber was still sealed, hostages still alive. Reinforcements were en route, loyalist forces responding to the coup attempt. "The Infinite Accord is secured," Bremoth announced, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Extremist elements have been neutralized." Ainsley slumped against a console, adrenaline starting to fade and leaving behind the kind of exhaustion that made her bones ache. She'd been shot at, nearly electrocuted, forced to fight her way through a ship full of hostiles, and somehow survived. She was definitely putting in for hazard pay. "The hostages?" she asked. "Safe. My forces are moving to secure them now." Bremoth turned to look at her, all 4 eyes focusing with an intensity that made her want to check for exits. "You fought well, Ainsley." First time he'd used her name. Progress, maybe. Or possibly just acknowledgement that she'd earned the right to be seen as a person instead of a negligible threat. "You weren't so bad yourself. I am a warlord. Combat is my purpose." He gestured at her with one claw. "You are a diplomat who claims to have left warfare behind. Yet you fight like someone born to it. I fight like someone who wants to survive. Big difference." Is there? He pulled up something on his console, the security scanner data from the chamber. The readouts showed her progression from negligible to battlefield variable to catastrophic when motivated. The scanner attempted to measure you using standard combat assessment protocols: strength, speed, natural weapons, technology. By every metric, you should have died in that chamber. But I didn't. No, because the scanner, like my people, was measuring the wrong things. He pulled up more data, extensive files on human military history that the Drethal had clearly compiled and then promptly misunderstood. We looked at your species and saw weakness because you lacked our advantages. We never considered that weakness could be a weapon in itself. Ainsley pushed herself upright, wincing at injuries she'd been ignoring during the fight. You're talking about asymmetric warfare. I am talking about a fundamental misunderstanding of what makes a species dangerous. Bremoth's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. The Drethal Empire has conquered hundreds of systems. We have defeated species with superior technology, greater numbers, better resources. We won because we were stronger, more disciplined, more committed to military excellence. Okay? But humans! He turned to face her fully, and there was something in those alien eyes that might have been respect, or possibly fear, or maybe both. Humans developed warfare as existential necessity. You spent millennia fighting each other, developing strategies to overcome superior forces. You turned disadvantage into advantage. You made weapons from psychology, from terrain, from the enemy's own assumptions. We got creative because we had to. And now you reach the stars, and the galaxy sees a species that is physically weak, technologically inferior, resource-poor by imperial standards. They see easy conquest. His voice dropped lower. They do not see what I saw today. They do not understand that humanity is the most dangerous species in known space, precisely because you appear weak. Ainsley was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. So, what happens now? Now the Drethal Empire revises its entire strategic assessment of humanity. No subjugation, no conquest. Full alliance as equals. He brought up a communication channel to the remaining diplomatic staff. And I will ensure every species in the Galactic Assembly understands what I learned today, which is that humans are apex predators who have convinced everyone else they are prey, and any species foolish enough to test that assumption will learn a very expensive lesson. Reinforcements arrived then, loyalist Drethal forces, pouring onto the bridge, medics following to assess casualties. Someone wrapped a trauma dressing around Ainsley's head wound. Someone else kept asking her questions about her condition that she answered on autopilot. She watched Bremoth coordinate the aftermath, saw the way his forces responded to his commands with respect bordering on reverence. This was a warlord who'd just had his entire worldview challenged and had come out the other side more dangerous for the knowledge. One of the medics approached Bremoth, presenting a datapad. The warlord reviewed it, then looked at Ainsley. The scanner has completed its final threat assessment of you. Oh, good. What's the verdict? He turned the datapad so she could see. The display showed her image with updated classifications. Species, human classification, apex predator, conditional threat level, catastrophic when motivated, recommended engagement. Protocol, avoid conflict, maintain alliance status. Species-wide assessment, requires complete strategic revision. Addendum, do not provoke. Huh, Ainsley said. That's new. That is accurate. Bremoth deactivated the datapad. I will be sending this assessment to every military database in the Empire, along with recommendations that all contact with humanity be conducted under strict diplomatic protocols. Because we're terrifying? Because you are unpredictable, creative, and refuse to accept defeat, even when logic dictates you should. He made that clicking sound again. She was starting to recognize it as laughter. Yes, terrifying covers it adequately. The next few hours were a blur of debriefings, medical scans, and diplomatic communications. Earth's government was informed that the peace talks had been disrupted by internal Drethal politics, but had ultimately resulted in a more favorable treaty than anyone expected. The part about their junior diplomat fighting her way through a coup attempt would be classified at a level that required its own classification. Ainsley found herself in the observation lounge as the Infinite Accord began moving back toward neutral space. Through the viewport, stars wheeled by in their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of biological life forms trying not to kill each other. Bremoth joined her, his massive frame somehow fitting into the human-sized furniture without breaking it. "You will return to diplomatic service?" he asked. "That's the plan, assuming I still have a job after all this. You saved multiple diplomatic delegations, prevented a coup, and secured an alliance. I suspect your employment is safe." "Maybe, but I'm pretty sure caused an interstellar incident is somewhere on my performance review. Consider it a learning experience." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the stars. Two beings from entirely different worlds, united by the shared experience of surviving something that should have killed them. "The galaxy will take time to adjust its view of humanity," Bremoth said eventually. "But word will spread. The species that appears weak but fights like nightmares when pushed. The ones who turn everything into weapons and refuse to quit. Is that a good thing? It is an honest thing. Better to be respected and feared than dismissed and conquered." Ainsley couldn't argue with that logic. Back on Earth, when she finally filed her report, she kept it simple. Attended peace negotiations, encountered complications, treaty successful, request extended leave. Her supervisor took one look at the classified addendum, the medical reports, and the personal commendation from a Drethal warlord, and approved her leave without questions. Sometimes it was better not to know. The Galactic Assembly learned a valuable lesson that day, though it took time to fully process. Never underestimate the unarmed human, especially the ones classified as negligible, because those were the truly dangerous ones.